Duke had been acting peculiar for 3 days. Not the kind of peculiar where a dog gets sick or tired, but the kind where every morning at sunrise he would stand at the fence staring toward the barren wasteland with an intensity that made Samuel Rodriguez's skin crawl. The dog wouldn't eat, wouldn't play, wouldn't even acknowledge the horses that needed tending. He just stood there, waiting for something that never came until today. This morning, when Samuel opened the ranch door, Duke bolted, not toward the usual creek or hunting spots, but straight into the Badlands where nothing lived and nothing grew. Samuel had never seen his dog run like that, as if his life depended on reaching something Samuel couldn't see. By the time Samuel saddled his stallion and followed the paw prints, Duke was already a dot on the horizon. But what made Samuel's blood run cold wasn't the distance his dog had covered. It was where the tracks led toward the old railway car. If this story is already gripping you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss what happens next. Let's continue. Everyone in Copper Valley knew about the rusted metal giant sitting in the middle of nowhere, half buried in dust and time, but nobody talked about how it got there, or why a fully intact train car would be abandoned so far from any railway line. The few veterans who mentioned it at all would change the subject fast, like there was something about that railway car that decent folks shouldn't discuss. Duke had never shown any interest in it before, never even looked in that direction during their countless rides across the plains. But now, as Samuel crested the final hill, he could see his dog circling the massive car, sniffing at something near its base. The afternoon sun caught the railway car's metal fittings, sending signals across the desert fog. Lore. That's when Samuel noticed something that made his heart skip. Fresh footprints around the train car, human footprints that weren't his own, boot marks that looked recent with clear edges that hadn't been softened by wind. Someone had been here very recently, walking around the car like they were searching for something specific. Samuel dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the sand with a soft thud that seemed too loud in the desert silence. The railway car loomed before him like a metal monument to something forgotten, its black iron surface blistered by years of relentless sun. Duke sat perfectly still beside the massive wheels, his ears pricked forward, watching Samuel with an expression that looked almost human in its urgency. The footprints were clear now, boot marks recent enough that the edges hadn't been softened by wind. Someone wearing worn leather soles had walked a complete circle around the car, stopping frequently as if searching for something specific. Samuel knelt and pressed his palm against one of the tracks. The sand was still firm underneath, meaning whoever made these marks had been here within the last day, maybe less. His thoughts raced as he studied the evidence. This was his land, or what was left of it. The bank had given him until the end of the month to come up with the money he owed, but that was still 3 weeks away. Nobody had any business being out here, especially not near the railway car that everyone seemed so eager to avoid discussing. Samuel felt his jaw tighten as anger began to override his caution. He'd lost almost everything already, his cattle stolen by rustlers, his water rights disputed by lawyers, his wife Elena buried under a headstone he couldn't afford to replace. The last thing he needed was strangers prowling around his property like they owned it. Duke suddenly stood and trotted toward the rear of the railway car, his tail rigid and alert. The dog disappeared behind the massive cargo section, leaving Samuel alone with the growing certainty that something was terribly wrong. "Duke," Samuel called, but his voice echoed strangely against the metal surfaces, coming back to him distorted and hollow. No response from the dog, but something else caught Samuel's attention. A section of the railway car's side panel hung slightly ajar, revealing a darkness that shouldn't exist. Train cars didn't have hidden compartments, at least none that Samuel had ever heard of. Yet there it was, a gap in what should have been solid iron, positioned just low enough that a man would have to crouch to see inside. The footprints led directly to this opening. Samuel approached the gap with his heart hammering against his ribs. The metal felt ice cold despite the desert heat, and when he peered into the darkness beyond, he could smell something strange. Not rust or decay, but something else. Something that reminded him of the bank vault back in Silverstone. He was about to investigate further when Duke's barking erupted from somewhere behind the railway car. Not his usual bark, but something frantic and warning. Samuel spun around, and that's when he saw the dust cloud on the horizon. Riders, at least 3 of them, approaching fast. Samuel grabbed his rifle from the saddle holster and crouched behind the railway car's massive frame. Using the iron beast as cover, the riders were still too far away to identify, but their urgency was unmistakable. They rode hard, pushing their horses at a pace that meant business, not leisure. Duke appeared from behind the cargo section, no longer barking but moving with the controlled tension of a predator. The dog positioned himself between Samuel and the approaching riders, his hackles raised in a way Samuel had only seen once before, when a pack of coyotes had threatened the cattle. Through the gaps in the railway car's undercarriage, Samuel watched the dust cloud grow larger. 3 riders, definitely maybe 4. They knew exactly where they were heading, riding in a straight line toward the train car without any of the hesitation someone would show if they were merely exploring. The metallic taste of fear filled Samuel's mouth as a terrible realization struck him. These people weren't here by accident. They knew about the railway car, about the hidden compartment, maybe even about whatever was inside it. The footprints he'd found weren't from curious wanderers. They were from scouts. But that raised questions that made his blood run cold. How long had people been watching him? How long had they known about whatever secret this old car contained? And why were they making their move now, just when his financial situation had become desperate enough that losing his land seemed inevitable? Samuel pressed his back against the warm iron and tried to control his breathing. The banknote was due in 3 weeks, but maybe that wasn't coincidence. Maybe someone wanted him gone, wanted him to lose this land so they could claim whatever was hidden in this railway car without interference. The sound of hoofbeats grew closer, and Samuel could hear voices now, though he couldn't make out words. Duke's ears swiveled toward the sounds, and the dog's body language shifted from protective to aggressive. Whatever was approaching, Duke recognized a threat. Samuel peered around the edge of the frame and caught his first clear glimpse of the riders. The man in the lead wore a black hat and rode with the confidence of someone who owned whatever he surveyed. Behind him, 2 others kept pace, their hands resting casually on their sidearms in a way that suggested experience with violence. The lead rider reined in his horse about 50 yards from the railway car and sat motionless for a long moment, scanning the area like he was reading sign. Then he turned to one of his companions and said something that made the man laugh, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. That's when Samuel realized they already knew he was there. The lead rider cupped his hands around his mouth and called out, his voice carrying clearly across the desert air. "Samuel Rodriguez, no need to hide. We've been waiting for you to make this discovery." Samuel felt his throat go dry. They knew his name, which meant this wasn't a chance encounter. These men had come here specifically for him, and they knew about whatever he'd discovered inside the railway car. He gripped his rifle tighter and tried to think of how to respond. "Don't see any reason to hide," Samuel called back, stepping out from behind the car, but keeping the weapon ready. "This is my land, and you're trespassing." The lead rider laughed and urged his horse closer, stopping just outside rifle range. He was older than Samuel had first thought, maybe 50, with gray threading through his dark beard and the kind of weathered face that came from decades of hard living. "Your land," the man said. "That's interesting, considering you're about 3 weeks away from losing it to the bank." The words hit Samuel like a physical blow. How could this stranger know about his financial troubles? The bank dealings were supposed to be private, but apparently word had traveled farther than he'd imagined. "Name's Marcus Stone," the man continued, settling comfortably in his saddle. "Maybe you've heard of me. I handle acquisitions for certain interested parties who have plans for this particular piece of desert." Samuel had heard the name whispered in saloons and general stores. Stone was the kind of man who appeared when someone needed a problem solved quietly. He worked for wealthy investors from back east, men who bought up struggling ranches and mining claims for pennies on the dollar. "I don't care who you work for," Samuel said. "You're still trespassing." "That railway car behind you," Stone said, ignoring the threat. "Beautiful piece of machinery, isn't it? Funny thing, though, according to the railroad company records, This particular car was reported stolen 15 years ago, disappeared right off the tracks one night, along with whatever cargo it was carrying. Are you as shocked as Samuel right now? Drop a comment below with your theory about what's inside that train car. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you're enjoying this wild Western mystery. Now back to the story. Samuel felt his stomach twist. A stolen railway car would explain why it sat abandoned in the middle of nowhere, why the old-timers refused to discuss it, but it also meant that whatever was hidden inside might be stolen too. The folks I represent have been very patient, Stone continued. They've been waiting for the right opportunity to recover what belongs to them, waiting for the current landowner to become desperate enough to see reason. Duke moved closer to Samuel, the dog's body tense and ready for trouble. Samuel could feel the weight of his situation settling around him like quicksand. These men knew about his debts, knew about the railway car, and they'd timed their arrival perfectly. "What do you want?" Samuel asked. Stone smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I want you to step away from that railway car and ride back to your ranch. Pretend you never saw anything here. In exchange, my employers might be willing to help with your financial difficulties. And if I refuse? Then we'll be having this conversation again after the bank forecloses, except next time, you won't own the land we're standing on." Samuel studied the three men, calculating odds and distances. Stone sat his horse with the relaxed posture of someone who held all the cards, while his two companions spread out slightly, creating a triangle that would be difficult to escape from. These weren't common thieves or drifters. They moved with military precision, and their horses were well-fed and well-trained. "You seem to know a lot about my business," Samuel said. "How do I know you can deliver on your promises?" "Because we already have," Stone replied. "Who do you think convinced the bank to extend your deadline from last week to the end of the month? My employers wanted time to handle this properly." The revelation hit Samuel like cold water. He'd been grateful when the bank Nager had suddenly agreed to the extension, thinking his luck was finally changing. Instead, he'd been manipulated, given just enough rope to hang himself with. "The cargo in that railway car," Stone continued, "was being transported to a mint in Denver when it disappeared. A very specific type of cargo that my employers have been tracking ever since. They're not interested in revenge or justice, just recovery." Samuel felt his pulse quicken. A mint meant precious metals, probably gold or silver. Enough to solve his financial problems, maybe enough to set him up for life. But it also meant these men wouldn't hesitate to kill for it. "I haven't taken anything," Samuel said carefully. "Not yet," Stone agreed, "but we've been watching this area for 3 days, ever since the desert winds shifted and started carrying the scent of old metal from this direction. Your dog picked up on it too, didn't he? Animals are sensitive to changes like that." Duke's ears flattened against his head, and the dog took a step forward, placing himself directly between Samuel and the mounted men. Something in the animal's posture had changed, becoming more aggressive, more territorial. "The recent heat expansion finally loosened something in that old car," Stone continued. "Been sealed tight for 15 years, but metal expands and contracts. Your dog detected the change in the air before you did." Samuel remained silent, but his mind raced. If these men had been watching him for days, they might know more about what was in the railway car than he did. They might even know how to open whatever was sealed inside. "Here's what's going to happen," Stone said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "You're going to show us what your dog found, help us retrieve what belongs to our employers, and then you're going to forget this ever happened. In return, your debt disappears and you keep your land." "And if I refuse?" One of Stone's companions shifted in his saddle, his hand moving closer to his sidearm. "Then you're going to have an accident out here in the desert. Tragic thing. Man getting thrown from his horse so far from help. Might be days before anyone finds the body." Samuel felt sweat trickling down his back despite the desert heat. These men weren't making idle threats. They had the look of professionals who'd solved problems like this before. But something else bothered him. If they knew about the hidden compartment, if they'd been planning this for weeks or even months, why did they need him at all? Unless whatever was inside the railway car required more than just no ledge to open. unless it required something specific that only he could provide. Samuel lowered his rifle slightly, making a calculated decision. What makes you think I can open something your people couldn't figure out in 15 years? Stone exchanged a look with one of his companions before answering. Because the compartment isn't just hidden, it's locked with a mechanism that requires a specific key, a key that was supposed to be destroyed when the railway car was stolen, but we have reason to believe it survived. I don't have any key, Samuel said. Maybe not knowingly, Stone replied. But your late wife Elena worked as a clerk for the railroad company before you two were married. She had access to certain records, certain information that other people didn't. Samuel felt his blood turn to ice. Elena had been dead for 2 years, and he'd never heard anyone connect her to the missing railway car. She'd worked for the railroad briefly, but only in the Silverstone office, handling correspondence and filing. Elena never said anything about a stolen train, Samuel said. She wouldn't have known what she was looking at, Stone explained, but railroad clerks kept copies of everything, shipping manifests, cargo lists, and most importantly, the combination codes for secure compartments. Your wife probably took some paperwork home with her the way most clerks did, mixed it in with household documents, recipes, letters. Samuel's mind raced back to the cedar chest where Elena had kept their important papers, bills, land deeds, her correspondence with relatives back in California. He'd never gone through everything after she died, couldn't bear to sort through her personal belongings. We searched your ranch while you were out working horses, one of Stone's men said with a smirk. Didn't find what we were looking for, but we found evidence it exists. Your wife was careful about keeping records. The violation of his home hit Samuel harder than the physical threats. These men had been inside his private space, touching Elena's things, searching through the few possessions that connected him to happier times. Where is it? Stone demanded. The combination, the key, whatever your wife saved from her railroad work. We know she took something home from that office. Samuel forced his expression to remain neutral while his thoughts churned. Elena had indeed brought work papers home sometimes, but he'd assumed they were routine correspondence. If she'd unknowingly saved information about the stolen railway car, it would explain why these men had orchestrated his financial ruin, why they'd waited until he was desperate enough to cooperate. Maybe she did take some papers, Samuel said carefully. But I don't know where they'd be now. Then you'd better start remembering, Stone said. Because my employers are running out of patience. They've invested considerable time and money in this recovery operation. We could have approached you directly, but we needed you to discover the compartment first. People are more cooperative when they think they have something to gain. Duke suddenly tensed and growled low in his throat, looking not at the mounted men, but toward the railway car itself. Samuel followed the dog's gaze and saw something that made his stomach clench. The hidden compartment door had swung open wider while they'd been talking, revealing more of the darkness inside. Something had shifted, creating a metallic scraping sound that echoed off the iron walls. All 4 men turned toward the railway car as the metallic scraping continued. The afternoon heat had been expanding the old iron all day, and the additional movement caused by their horses had finally shifted something inside the hidden compartment. Through the widened gap, Samuel could see a glint of something that definitely wasn't iron or brass. Well, would you look at that? Stone said softly. Seems like the desert's doing our work for us. One of his companions dismounted and approached the railway car, drawing his sidearm as he moved. Samuel raised his rifle again, but Stone held up a hand. Easy now, Stone said. No need for bloodshed if we all keep our heads. Jake's just going to take a peek at what we've been discussing. Jake reached the railway car and knelt beside the opening, peering into the darkness. After a moment, he let out a low whistle. Boss, you need to see this. Stone dismounted and walked to the compartment, leaving his remaining man mounted and watching Samuel. The arrangement was clearly tactical, keeping Samuel covered while the leaders investigated their prize. Sweet mother of pearl, Stone breathed as he looked inside. 15 years, and it's all still here. Samuel couldn't see what they were looking at, but he could hear the excitement in their voices. Whatever was in that compartment was worth the years of planning and manipulation they'd invested. Here's the problem, though. Jake said, his voice carrying clearly in the desert air. "The main container is still sealed tight. We're going to need that combination your wife saved." Stone straightened and turned back to Samuel with an expression that had hardened considerably. "Change of plans, Rodriguez. We're all going back to your ranch right now, and you're going to find those papers. No more negotiations. No more delays. And if I can't find them, then we'll tear that ranch apart board by board until we do," Stone replied. "Your wife was a careful woman. She kept records of everything, including things she probably didn't understand the importance of." Samuel felt the weight of his impossible situation. These men had already violated his home once, and now they wanted him to help them do it again. But he also realized something they might not have considered. If Elena had indeed saved papers from the railroad office, and if those papers contained the information needed to open the sealed container, then Samuel held the only bargaining chip that mattered. Stone needed him alive and cooperative, at least until they recovered whatever was hidden in that railway car. "All right," Samuel said, making his decision. "We'll go to the ranch, but I want to see inside that compartment first. I want to know exactly what I'm helping you steal." Stone smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Fair enough. But just remember, once you've seen it, there's no going back. You'll be part of this whether you like it or not." Samuel approached the railway car's hidden compartment, his boots crunching on the sand as Stone and Jake stepped aside to give him a clear view. The opening G was larger now, wide enough for a man to reach inside, and the afternoon sun illuminated what lay within. Metal containers arranged in precise rows, each one stamped with official markings that Samuel recognized from his brief time working freight jobs before he bought the ranch. These were the kind of sealed transport boxes used by banks and government offices for moving valuable cargo over long distances. "Gold ingots," Stone said quietly. 52 containers, each one holding 25 pounds of pure gold that was being shipped to the Denver Mint for processing into coins, worth more now than it was 15 years ago. Samuel did the calculation in his head, nearly 300 pounds of gold. Enough money to buy 20 ranches the size of his, enough to set a man up for life, or to destroy him if the wrong people found out he had it. The railway crew was supposed to deliver this cargo and return with empty containers, Jake added. Instead, they decided to disappear one night, figuring they could hide out in the desert until the heat died down. Problem was, they didn't know about the Comanche who were raiding in this area back then. Samuel felt his stomach tighten. Everyone in the territory knew the stories about that period, when small groups of travelers had simply vanished without a trace, their remains sometimes found years later. The crew never made it out of the desert, Stone continued, but they were smart enough to seal this compartment before they died, probably hoping someone would find it eventually and know what to do with it. "Why didn't your employers just take the railway car apart years ago?" Samuel asked. "Because the compartment was designed to be opened only with the proper combination," Stone replied. "Force it open and internal mechanisms destroy the contents. The railroad company built these containers to prevent exactly this kind of theft." This story just keeps getting more intense. If you're loving these twists and turns, smash that like button and let us know in the comments what you think Samuel should do next. Should he trust Stone or fight back? Keep watching to find out. Samuel studied the sealed containers, understanding now why these men had gone to such elaborate lengths to manipulate him. They needed Elena's paperwork not just to find the combination, but to ensure they could open the compartment without triggering whatever security measures had been built into it. The combinations were kept in 3 places, Jake explained. The main office in Denver, which burned down in 1889, the locomotive engineer's personal records, which disappeared with him, and the clerk files, which your wife took home. Duke moved closer to Samuel, the dog's attention focused not on the men, but on something else entirely. Samuel followed the animal's gaze and realized what had caught his attention. In the distance, another dust cloud was approaching, this one larger than the first. "You expecting company?" Samuel asked. Stone spun around, his hand moving immediately to his sidearm. "Jake, how many riders?" Jake climbed onto the railway car's running board for a better view. 5, maybe 6. Moving fast. Stone cursed under his breath. Those would be my employers. Come to check on our progress. They weren't supposed to arrive until tomorrow. The approaching riders came into clear view within minutes, and Samuel could see immediately that these were different from Stone's men. They wore expensive clothes despite the desert conditions, and their horses were the kind that cost more than most people made in a year. These were the Eastern investors, the men who had orchestrated everything. "Stone," the lead rider called out as they approached. "You were supposed to wait for our arrival before proceeding." "Circumstances changed, Mr. Harrison," Stone replied, his voice suddenly deferential. "The compartment opened on its own due to thermal expansion. We had to move quickly." Harrison dismounted and strode toward the railway car, his eyes immediately focusing on the exposed gold containers. He was a thin man with the pale complexion of someone who spent most of his time indoors, but his movements had the controlled precision of someone accustomed to absolute authority. "Have you retrieved the contents yet?" Harrison asked. "We need the combination codes first," Stone explained. "They're in documents that Rodriguez's deceased wife kept from her railroad work." Harrison turned his attention to Samuel for the first time, studying him with the calculating gaze of a man evaluating livestock. "Mr. Rodriguez, I trust you understand the gravity of your situation." Samuel felt the weight of 6 armed men surrounding him, but he also recognized that he held the only thing they couldn't take by force. "I understand that you need something from me." "Indeed we do," Harrison replied. "And in exchange for your cooperation, we're prepared to offer you a substantial reward. Say 5% of the recovered value. 5% of nearly 1,300 pounds of gold would still be more money than Samuel had ever seen, enough to pay off his debts and keep his ranch." But something in Harrison's tone suggested that any agreement they made would be temporary at best. "There's just one problem," Samuel said. "I don't have those papers anymore." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of wind moving across the desert. Harrison's expression didn't change, but Samuel could feel the tension radiating from every man present. "Explain," Harrison said quietly. "Elena was careful about important documents," Samuel continued. "She didn't just keep them at home. She made copies and stored them in different places. The originals went to her sister back in California when Elena got sick, along with other family papers. It was a complete lie, but Samuel delivered it with the conviction of a man who had nothing left to lose. The truth was that Elena's papers were still in their ranch house, in the cedar chest, where she'd always kept important documents. However, Samuel added, I remember enough details to open that compartment. Elena showed me the railroad coding system once, explained how the combinations worked. She was proud of her work. Harrison exchanged glances with his men. You're saying you can open it yourself? I'm saying I can try, Samuel replied. But if I succeed, I want half of what's inside, not 5%. And I want it in writing, signed by all of you. The negotiation that followed was brief, but intense. Harrison clearly wanted to refuse, but the alternative was admitting to his investors that 15 years of planning had failed because of one stubborn rancher. In the end, they reached an agreement. Samuel would attempt to open the sealed compartment using his knowledge of Elena's work. If successful, he would receive 30% of the recovered gold, enough to secure his foot, or permanently. The combination Samuel tried was actually Elena's birth date combined with their wedding anniversary, numbers she'd used for everything important in their life together. When the first container clicked open, revealing rows of gleaming gold ingots, the assembled men let out a collective sigh of relief. 6 months later, Samuel Rodriguez was the wealthiest rancher in Copper Valley, his debts paid, and his future secured. Stone and his men had moved on to other ventures, while Harrison had returned east with his recovered investment. And in the cedar chest where Elena had kept their important papers, the real railroad documents remained safely hidden, containing combinations for dozens of other missing shipments that Samuel had decided to keep as his own secret insurance policy. What an incredible ending. Did you see that twist coming? Samuel turned out to be smarter than everyone thought. If you enjoyed this thrilling Western tale of hidden treasure and clever negotiations, make sure to subscribe for more amazing stories like this one. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest adventures, and don't forget to like this video if it kept you on the edge of your seat. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Samuel's situation? Would you have trusted the men or found another way? Your engagement helps us create more content like this. Ready for another heart-pounding Western adventure? Click the video appearing on your screen now to watch our next story where a mysterious stranger rides into town with secrets that will change everything. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next tale of the Untamed Frontier.